benvenuti a tutti, bentrovati alla terza giornata di Social Media Week Torino. Quello a cui state per assistere è il Global Keynote di Social Media Week Torino, una breve presentazione di quello che è. Dalla sede centrale di New York ci hanno chiesto un rappresentante che potesse rappresentare a tutti gli effetti innovazione per l'Italia. Ci hanno chiesto in realtà di fare alcune proposte, noi non abbiamo avuto alcun dubbio nel presentare l'ospite a cui a breve lascerò la parola. È un onore averlo qui con noi, Carlo Ratti, architetto, ingegnere italiano, fondatore del MIT Sensible Lab al Massachusetts Institute of Technology, è un grande visionario, ha lavorato moltissimo con le tecnologie mobili, lui vive tra Boston, Singapore e Torino. Perché lo abbiamo scelto? Noi l'abbiamo scelto ovviamente per tutto quello che ho appena descritto, ma anche perché questa città che quest'anno ha deciso di ospitare Social Media Week Torino è una città che sta lavorando per divenire una smart city. Carlo Ratti, tra le tante cose che ha fatto nella sua carriera, un esempio di quello che ha realizzato a Roma alcuni anni fa, ha tracciato il traffico della popolazione romana utilizzando il GPS dei cellulari. Con questo, oltre chiaramente a graficare tutto quello che è stato il movimento della popolazione romana, lui ha voluto dimostrare come questi dati potessero essere utili per riorganizzare la città in un'ottica più utile, più condivisa e più smart per l'appunto. Lui, Carlo Ratti, è fautore di un'architettura digitale atta a ricostruire le città in un'ottica smart. È per noi quindi un grande onore presentarvelo qui insieme a noi. Vi ricordiamo che l'intervento avverrà in lingua inglese e che sarà trasmesso in streaming insieme a tutte le altre città del mondo presenti in Social Media Week 2012. Quindi grazie mille a Carlo Ratti, benvenuti alla Social Media Week Torino. A lui la parola. Grazie.
Grazie. Should I switch to English? Scusa, io avrei parlato volentieri in italiano torinese, ma mi fanno parlare in inglese. Comunque, so I'll start in English. Well, thanks a lot. It's a great pleasure to be back here, to be back in Torino. And can we have the lights a bit down? Possiamo abbassare un po' le luci della sala. While you were speaking, I actually was adding the slide on Rome, because I wasn't planning to show the project we did in Rome. It's a bit like an old project, but I just opened it from another presentation so I can share it with you. Now, I call the title of my presentation Sensible Cities. We do not like much the name of smart cities. And we think the sensible is more human. It talks more about people and how, we can have it. You can, yes, use technology, but we can react and respond more to people. So just a few things about what our group does. Now, I wanted to start with an example. And this example is from Formula One. Now, just a few years ago, if you wanted to win a Formula One race, you needed a good car and a good driver. You need good physical things. Now, today, if you want to win a Formula One race, you also need something like this. A system which is made of thousands and thousands of sensors onto the car, collecting information, sending it to those computers, and making decisions in real time. In other terms, if you're an engineer, you would call this a real-time control system, which is very simple. It's a system made of two components, a sensing component and an actuating component, collecting information and responding to that information. Now, and sensing and actuation is really what we do most of the time, what every living system does. When we meet each other, we sense each other, we shake hands, we look at each other, we touch each other, and then we respond to that. Now, the amazing thing we believe is that what is happening now is that our cities are starting to behave a little bit like that Formula One racing car. Our cities have been covered, layered with many, many different types of sensors and networks. And so they're starting to behave in a different way. The way we can collect information from cities, the way we can respond to that information is changing very much. And we believe cities are important. Just 4 numbers about cities: 2, 50, 75, 80. Cities are 2% of the surface of the planet, but they're 50% of the population, 75% of energy consumption, and 80% of CO2 emissions. So if you're able to do something to make our cities work better, then that can be a big deal. You will also ask me, well, all of this is fine, but where is all of this technology going to lead us, to take us? And I'll try to answer that by quoting Paola Antonelli. She's a curator at the Museum of Modern Art in New York, and she recently did an exhibition called Talk to Me. We were actually part of that exhibition, and the theme was really that because of this technology, our cities, our buildings, our objects are starting to talk back to us. So what we can do is actually have an architecture that can become much more responsive. They can really respond to us in a different way, almost as if every atom out there of the physical world were becoming both a sensor and an actuator. And if you want, that's nothing else than the old dream of Michelangelo. When he sculpted the Mose, he took the hammer, as you know well, threw it and shouted, "Why don't you speak?" And today, for the first time, actually, our things can start to speak back to us, talk back to us. Now, I just divided the presentation into two components. One is called sensing. It's about the collection of information that we couldn't do just in the recent future. And the other one about actuation, how we can actually respond to that information. Now, about the sensing, I wanted to share with you, for instance, a project that we did recently in the United States. It's based on the following problem. Now, if you take this computer, you know everything about this computer. Every chip in this computer, you know where it was produced. You can see it there on the map, how it moved on the planet, how it became this machine. However, a few years from now, when you throw away this computer, you know very little about it. When it becomes waste, sometimes it ends up like this, where you wouldn't want it to be, like maybe in places in Africa or in Asia. So in other terms, today we know where our objects come from, but we don't know where they go. So our idea was, well, what if we could actually develop a little chip that we could put on trash and then see where trash goes. So here is the little chip. We had to develop it to do it. We did it with Qualcomm together with them. There was nothing we could get really off the shelf, so we had to design it from an engineering point of view. Then this was the first deployment we did in Seattle. 500 people in 3,000 pieces of waste. Can we have, the music. Every possible thing. And then following that, after tagging all of this, we started tracing it. And here you can see 3,000 traces from Seattle. That's a city. The day of deployment. You can see some of the main landfills next to Seattle after a week. But then a big surprise. Actually, a lot of stuff started traveling very, very far, from the West Coast to the East Coast. And look at the trace that went actually all the way to Chicago and then went into Baja California, sometimes in completely random way. And traveling very far, especially e-waste, cell phones and cartridges and other e-waste, batteries, still moving after a month or a couple of months. So what did we learn from this? Well, the first thing we learned is, for an engineer, you can take all of this data and then you say, well, I can design a better system, so you can actually make a more optimized system for waste management. The other thing that's important is actually that this information, if you give it to people, then you can promote behavioral change. Actually, one of the most interesting things that people told us, after seeing this, one person told us, I used to drink water in plastic bottles and put the plastic bottles out of my door and think every day it would disappear. But now I know that's not the case. Actually, the plastic bottles go just a few miles from home, and then they will stay there forever. So because of that, I actually decided to stop drinking water in plastic bottle. Now, the third thing actually that we learned from this project, that was rather unexpected. And that happened when a burglar came to our lab at MIT, installed a lot of stuff, including some of the tags that tell you where they go. And here is what happened. Right. Well, this was an example of all this incredible amount of data we can collect. The amount of data we can collect today is staggering. If you take all the data that were produced from the beginning of humanity till 2003, well, the same amount we produce between the weekend and today in the past couple of days. So that amount we produce now every couple of days. So, and this data is of many different sources. So you saw here is data that can come from sensors, like in what we have just seen with the trash, but it's data also that we all generate every day. It's the data that we produce when we go on Facebook, on Flickr, when we take pictures. In this case, our lab was one of the first ones to actually look at pictures put online and how they can help describe what is going on. So look at this, for instance, is Florence, and you can see to the left, you can see all of Tuscany, where people take pictures in Tuscany and then upload them to Flickr. All of this is public information, so you can see the top places where people, the top places where tourists go and take pictures. And then you can zoom into Florence and look at the center, and there you see the key places, Ponte Vecchio and the Duomo and so on. And then you can also zoom in all the way and you see the Duomo Battistero and see where people actually go. Now, then if you do something slightly more sophisticated, you can look at each picture, and then if you read in the header of the picture, you have the time when the picture was taken. So by using that, you can then do traces of pictures. You can see the first one, the second one was taken by the same person. All of this is public information, and you can actually look at how people move over space. So look at this. This actually shows you Italians and Americans as they move in Tuscany. Now, I got a question for you. So where are the Americans? To the left or to the right? Americans to the left, raise your hands. You need to make a decision. So Americans to the left, great. Americans to the right? Okay, well, the first one, the group won, so Americans are actually to the left. And you understand if you are from the United States, you go to Tuscany, you might go once in a lifetime or once every 10 years. And then, you go there and will go to the main cities. You will go to Genova, Pisa, Firenze, Siena, and so on. Well, actually, if you're Italian and you've gone to Tuscany many times, then you go to small places. You want to discover hidden little gems. And, look at how different it is the way we move in Tuscany. Look at Isola d'Elba. No Americans there, but actually a lot of Italians going there and taking pictures. Well, you can do the more sophisticated things. This is something that our students were very excited about doing a real-time map of partying in Barcelona using this data. So you can see here the best way to go partying in the city. As it happens, you look at the picture, you see what happens, and you can see, where people are having fun. They even managed to get a scientific paper by analyzing the geography of Britons and parties in the city, in Barcelona, that turns out to be quite high. And then you can also look at other things, like you can look at the color of the picture, and so you can almost monitor drought during the year in the country. So if you look at the country, how it changes color, how green is stronger at the beginning and then, gets drier and drier. So it's almost like monitoring the country, not using different type of sensors as we do today, but actually using everybody's eyes. That's how we call the project the world's eyes, los ojos del mundo. Well, that's another example. Then you can actually take all this information and combining. And that's what we're doing in Singapore. So that's really what is happening in cities around the world. Imagine a living city where you know in real time all what's happening around yourself. And, in this case, you combine all this data and you make it public so that people can access it. So here you got information about where the people are, how energy is consumed, and how it changes temperature. How the city changes during special events. That's the Formula One Grand Prix in Singapore. So how the city, everybody goes there and watches. Even simple things like rain and taxis. When it rains in patches, and it's impossible to get a taxi. But if you combine the information about rain and taxis, then you can provide a good service to taxi drivers and people. How the city expands and shrinks because of traffic during the day. That's all of Singapore. And then how all of this connects with the global flows. So you've got the flows in the city, but also the global flows connecting with it. That's all of the flights coming in, coming out, going out, containers coming in, coming out. Now, I didn't want to show you the project that Salvatore mentioned before about Rome, but because he mentioned it, I just took it from another presentation, and I'll just share it with you. It's really about, I didn't want to show it because it's now an old project, but it was one of the first times that we started doing this, and I'll just share it with you because he mentioned it. So this was actually at the Venice Biennale in 2006, 6 years ago, and we had a pavilion. And what we tried to do is, start to look at Rome and said, well, it was the first time this was done. It hadn't been done before. Can we use all the data from the cell phone network, anonymized and aggregated, in order to see what happens in the city? So we created a system like this with a number of partners. And what I will show you now is, for instance, that was 2006. 2006, something very special happened. As you might recall, is when Italy won the soccer World Cup, the Coppa del Mondo. So look at the city of Rome through the eyes, through the lens of all what happens on the cell phone network. So look at what happens on the cell phone network when Italy wins. Remember the World Cup, the final, Zidane, the headbutt, and Italy wins. So here is it. So here you see before the match in Italy, it's the morning. You see people moving here and there, going shopping and going here and there in the city. It's the afternoon, then the match begins, and silence. Nobody talks anymore. France scores, Italy scores, halftime, people make a quick call. Second half, end of normal time, and then you got first overtime, second overtime, Zidane, the headbutt now, and then Italy wins. And then that night, as you might recall, everybody went to the center to celebrate, so you see a big peak there. Then the following day, there was a big meeting with the winning team and the Prime Minister, Prodi, in the center. And then you see, at the end of the day, everybody went to the Circo Massimo here to celebrate. And you see a big peak by the end of the day. So it's a project now, it's 6 years old. I've not shown it, but because Salvatore mentioned it. But that's really about how we can really, today, use data to describe space and cities in a different way. Now, however, all of this was about sensing, about collecting information. Now, what about the other component, about the actuation? In the end, the goal is really to win the race, like in the Formula One car, the goal is really to respond to that information. And actuation can come in many ways. Sometimes just the data itself can be a form of actuation. This is a project, for instance, that where we've been working in the UK. We built the largest ever social network in the UK, and as we ask ourselves, how can we use this social network, in order to partition the country into regions that are not determined by politics, they're not determined by the past and by government, but really by how we communicate. Here is the idea. So every time we have a link between two places, a communication, we have a link between two places, and then if we aggregate all of this, we get something we could call the human network. And then we take the human network and use it to find communities. Regions really based on how we talk to each other, we communicate with each other. So there's interesting mathematics to do that. And what you find is that you find like a new geography, almost a new map of the UK, that's somehow similar but somehow different. It's really more based on people. A more human and natural way of drawing the map based on how we communicate with each other. And actually, I got something to show you here that it's actually still unpublished. It's a paper that's going to come out quite soon. But we got some data also on Italy and tried to do the same thing on Italy. So here it is. So the first thing I wanted to tell you is that Padania does not seem to exist, as you see on this map. But you can see some interesting things, like you see like Domodossola that connects much more to Milan, as we intuitively know. It's part of Piedmont, but it connects more to Milan. You can see this piece of Tuscany that actually connects more to Liguria, to La Spezia, as we also know, but here you actually can measure it. You can see this, in Emilia-Romagna, people are very peculiar about, the different parts vertically, Piacenza and then Emilia and Romagna. So you see actually the difference here. In the same ways, you see a kind of Magna Grecia in this part of Italy. And then you can look at this at the scale of the provinces. So you can actually zoom in and to understand how are provinces structured. And that's really, there's no any information there. There's only one type of information, is how we communicate with each other. So all of this is done simply by using a DAT. It's almost like a map that's built by all of us in a bottom-up way. Well, that's a way to get this information and promote actuation. Like one of the things when we presented this to number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office in the UK, they were very interested in actually using it for redrawing the constituencies, which is something that they are currently working on. And in Italy, you could use this information in order to think better the boundaries of provinces or metropolitan regions. How large is Rome or Milan or Turin? You can actually measure it with this information. So that's a way of actuating or promoting a response. Another way of actuating the system from this information is actually just by sharing the information with people. So what you see here, it's a project we are doing in Paris with SNCF, the French railway company. And this is how Paris look like if you have a time budget. So if you move by bicycle, by metro, or by car, that's how big the city is. However, if tomorrow you had actually a different type of budget, say a CO2 budget, this is how it looks, by bicycle, or metro, and by car. So what SNCF asks us is, can we actually quantify CO2 emissions by people? CO2 emissions by people. CO2 emissions by travel are 30% of the total. So is there any way we can actually provide people this information, but with no user input? So you don't need to do anything, but at the end of the day, is it possible to know how much CO2 you have emitted? Well, many of us have now smartphones in our pockets. We have become almost like walking sensors. And, we got GPS, accelerometer, other type of sensors. So look at how your cell phone sees you when it is in your pocket. This is the accelerometer in your smartphone. When you are, look how it sees you when you're on a bus, walking, or biking, or in a metro. If you were horseback riding, you will see trotting or galloping there. So the point is, you use all of it automatically. You can know the mode of transportation, and at the end of the day, with a small app, it's not public yet, but we're working on that. With a small app, you can actually know how many miles you did, your mode of transportation, how much CO2 you emitted, and also how many calories you burn. And then if you want, you can change your behavior. So this is a way that this data can become a tool, a way to promote behavioral change. Well, I'm going from this to more architectural project. The same can also happen at the scale of our buildings. Again, this is what people call smart homes or smart buildings. Again, we don't like much the concept of smart. We think it's a bit, it doesn't put people at the center. We prefer to talk more about sensible. This is a project we presented at the Design Fair Salone in Milan in this April. And the idea is how from next year, all of our appliances, or at least all of the appliances produced by the Indesit Merloni Hotpoint group, will have a little chip that allows them to be online. And they came to us with a very precise question is, when you have everything online, what could you do with that? And so we started thinking about how we can do an easier interface. The washing machine is still something where usually you need to look at the manual. But when you got an iPad, you don't look at the manual, it's intuitive. So can we actually, when everything is online, can we use an easier interface? Can we even solve some small problems like when you cook, you usually go back and forth with the recipe on your computer and back to the place for cooking and so on. How can all of this brought seamlessly onto a cooking table, like here, where actually every place is the place where you can cook and you have information at your fingertips. So here is the pavilion we did in Milan. Okay, and so this is, and I'm going more from the scale of the home to the larger scale. So, going back to the public space and the city. This is another project. It's a project we did in Zaragoza at the World Expo. That was just in 2008 before Shanghai. And the mayor came to us before the expo. The theme of the expo was water. And he said, is there any way we can actually use water in a new way thanks to digital technology? Water has been a great ingredient of architecture in the past, especially in Spain, in Italy, in all the Mediterranean region. Can we use it in a different way? And we had some workshop at MIT, and one of the ideas that came up was, imagine you have a pipe, and this pipe has many solenoid valves, opening and closing very fast. Then you can actually create a water curtain where you can control drops of water one by one. So you can use it for writing, for showing images, patterns, text. You can also make it interactive. So if you have a sensor, when somebody is jumping, it opens up to let you jump through. Well, this was the initial idea. We presented to the mayor. The mayor liked it. So we got a commission to design the pavilion at the entrance of the expo. It's called Digital Water Pavilion. The whole pavilion is made of water. There's no doors or windows, but when you approach it, it opens up to let you in. And then when you're inside, all of the walls actually expand and shrink if there's more people or less people. So the space becomes fluid inside. The roof is also covered with a thin layer of water. And then, if there's too much wind, you can actually lower the roof to minimize splashing. Or at the end of the day, you can close the pavilion and the whole architecture disappears. Hopefully without anybody underneath. There's sensors for that as well. Well, here you can see the building before the opening. This guy, you don't see the face very well, but he was very puzzled, very concerned about what was happening. Here it was myself trying not to get wet, testing the sensors to get in the building. Now, I should tell you now what happened one night when all of the sensors that detect people when they approach the building stopped working. And, we were terrified because the building would keep doing its own crazy things, but didn't respond anymore to people. But actually, that night was one of the most fun nights because that night, thousands of kids from all of Zaragoza came to the pavilion to engage and play in a different game. Not anymore a pavilion that opens up to let you in, but a pavilion you had to cheat like this. And for us, it was interesting because as architects, as engineers, we always think how people will use the things we design. But actually, reality, especially when you design interactive things, and especially human reality, is always a surprise. In this case, it was a good surprise. Now, from those were like pixels made of water. Now think about pixels in the air, pixels, drops of light in the air. It was a follow-up project we are still working on. And imagine you can actually use the small helicopters that we all know about that just, are a few dollars or $1, and we can use them in a different way, like this. So how you can use it in order to create surfaces, but it go a bit beyond 2D. How this can become a full 3D kind of space where you can control light and breathe light into space in different ways. How you can then, arrange them in different ways with different type of resolutions. Almost if your computer screen were to become, floating in the air, and then this could become fully three-dimensional. So then, you can see things from different points of view, and becomes like not only a 2D display, but almost like a full 3D. Well, some of this was real, some of this was computer generated. Here you see some of the real ones actually tested. Then this was in our lab. You turn on the lights. It looks pretty bad. That's all the little mosquitoes on the floor. But we are working on it, and actually we'll have a next ramped up prototype pretty soon. We have done several iterations of them, and now we're able to control them very, very precisely. So we'll have some new things soon. I wanted to go all the way to the urban scale. We saw the scale of the person, the scale of the home, the kitchen, the scale of the pavilion and public space, and then the scale of the city. And this, for instance, is a new neighborhood we are designing in Mexico. It was presented by the Mexican president, Calderon, at the World Economic Forum a few months ago. And what we're trying to do here is actually look at how a smart technology, a smart city, can also become much more human, because it allows us to do things we couldn't do before, like living and working outdoors. Till a few years ago, we were in our offices chained to a desk. We couldn't really move. There was not enough wireless connectivity. But today we can be much more flexible in the things we do. And here the idea is actually the city becomes really a place where we can work outdoors. Guadalajara is, it's a place where basically they say it's always spring or summer. Sometimes it's cloudy summer or sunny summer, but it's always kind of very good weather. Sometimes a bit hot. And but then you can actually use the courtyards in this case as new places for working. The whole office is most of the time outdoor, and of course you need to solve some things about lighting levels, about how to get power and so on. So that's the new development that's next to this park called Parque Morelos. Next to it you have a World Heritage Site called Hospicio Cabañas with beautiful courtyards, traditional ones. And then really we started from the courtyards to imagine these new type of spaces for living and working like this. We can be inside, outside, have meetings, have more privacy, less privacy, but a more friendly way of working than being in a big glass box, as it happens in many office developments around the world today. Some of the old courtyards and some of the new ones here. And so, in the concept, we are still working on the project. In the concept, we actually focus on the whole master plan, but we also invited some of what we thought were key, cool digital designers from all over the world to also imagine how these courtyards could be in a more crazy way. This is actually UDA from Torino. This is Jürgen Meyer from Germany, who imagined this. This is Mei Jin-yoon from the United States. This is actually one of our visions for how the courtyards can become almost like an interface between this physical and digital world where we are working. Now, I gave you this as a quick overview between the projects, the sensing component and the actuating component, how really this is changing the way we can collect information from our environment and respond to that. And design, of course, is one of the key ways to respond to that. I wanted to share with you one project in more detail, just to say something about what we think is a big change in methodology in the way we're actually designing today. And this project is called the Copenhagen Wheel. It's a project we did for the city of Copenhagen. The mayor came to us with a precise question, say, how can these technologies help us with traffic? So we all went to Copenhagen, and to the surprise of many American students, we all found this condition, most of you know about it, that Copenhagen is a city where traffic means a lot of bicycles. It's a city where 30 to 50% of all trips every day are actually done by bicycle. So we started working on it and we came up with this idea. So this is the idea. So basically how we can actually very easily turn a bicycle into a hybrid bicycle. You brake, you get your energy, and then you get it back. And then you also do these things about data that you heard in the video. But what I'd like to share with you is actually how the project came about. And that's because we think that this is telling us something about how the world of design and architecture and media are actually coming together in a different way. Now, we started by looking at the problem of traffic in Copenhagen, had an initial workshop with students, and came out with several ideas, including one that was about this funny-looking wheel that didn't have almost any technical details in it, but was supposed to do something like that, to collect your energy and then give it back to you. Well, when you have an idea, you don't know if it works or doesn't work, then the best thing is just, let's try it out. So then here are the first sketches. We put together some different pieces, combined them with a motor all together, and here was the first wheel. Didn't look too sexy, but it was working. And here was the wheel at MIT, and here was the wheel with the mayor of Copenhagen. She liked it, so she said, okay, let's go ahead. So then we get back to the drawing board, started thinking again about what we wanted to do. And here you see the brief again, so how we can get something that's easily retrofitted, with regenerative braking, intelligent locking, and so on, the other things you heard in the video. We went back to designing it in a different way. You see the choice of the motor, selecting it, putting everything together, combining it inside the hub. And then, so far we had the involvement of designers and also electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, and a few others. But then we had to design other components, for instance, to connect this with the rim outside. So here is the first idea we had. Didn't look very good, actually. Then the second idea looked a bit better, but it wasn't working. As you see, the torque is not transmitted from the center to the outside. And then we had this idea of can we have actually spokes that from the rim go to the hub, turn in tension, and go back without any connection. And some people thought it would work, some people thought it wouldn't work. So again, the best thing is, let's try it out. Here is the first prototype made of cardboard. Today it's very easy to prototype. In Torino, there's the first Italian Fab Lab where you got a lot of digital machines like laser cutters, 3D printer. So you can do this thing very quickly in a few hours. This is 3D printer. So you got a printer that does this for you, quite strong. And then we had to put everything together, try to put the spokes. He was very skeptical, as you see. He think it wouldn't work, but actually it was working. So that became the way to do the spoking. And then some other people became involved to design the interface. That's user interaction designers in graphics to do this and understand how you can control this with your phone. And then we also wanted to do the data collection, as you saw. And people today do data collection like this, but that's not what we wanted to do. So we went to other type of sensors that could measure CO, NOx, noise, distance with the wheel. And the interesting thing is that when you put just a few bicycles in the city, then you get a lot of information about air quality like this. While today the problem is that big cities have usually few monitoring stations, but they tell you little about air quality around the city. For instance, you might recall that in Madrid, the previous mayor kept mentioning that actually air quality was getting better and better till when citizens found out that he was taking the stations and moving them more and more inside parks. In an alternative, here, if you have this information, you can actually, from the bicycle, each bicycle become a way to collect data, in this case about air quality, and then share it with others. And then we had to build the prototypes. So here you can see a few of them, how they came together, how everything was programmed, was packed, and then, sent to Copenhagen where the mayor wanted to show it. And here you see, the first prototype. We actually now have done 2 rounds more of engineering. And there's a new company there's a spin-off that got recently venture capital funds to actually take this into production. And here you can see actually the mayor of Copenhagen and the mayor of Toronto trying the bicycle. All right, and as we're approaching the end of the time, I wanted just to share with you a few thoughts about how we think architecture is changing. And now, we used to think about knowledge is something like this, where we could actually put everything in the right spot. It was still the old St. Thomas idea of the summa. You could actually systematize everything. But we know today that that's not the case anymore. We know today that knowledge looks more like this. That's a map that was on the cover of Science magazine, where 800,000 papers were taken and all the links between them mapped. And you see these beautiful links happening between very different disciplines, between brain research, industrial physics, and computer science and social sciences, how everything is really connecting with everything else, like we do online and like things are on the internet. This is an article in Nature, another scientific journal, where they actually saw that the top papers in the past usually were by one person, one author in one discipline. And by top papers, they use the impact factor, which is a measure of how many papers cite those papers. It's almost like the likes in Facebook. Now, today, actually, top papers are usually by many authors from many different disciplines. And we believe that something like this is actually happening as well in design. Design used to be like this. That's one of the most important images of architecture of the past century. That's Le Corbusier presenting his plan for Paris. And his plan was quite simple. It was actually demolish most of the city, all of the city, just leave a few things like Notre Dame as, to remind people of the past, and actually replace everything with his beautiful new towers. And you see the hand of Le Corbusier, the hand of the architect, almost like the hand of God, from the top down, giving this design to the people. And people even said, that we couldn't design collaboratively. There's a saying in English that goes, a camel is a horse designed by a committee. So if you got a committee, if you got more people, you will not end up with a beautiful horse, you will end up with a camel. Well, we know now that that's not the case. Now we've seen beautiful things that come up actually by doing things bottom up. We know how things work on Wikipedia. We know how things work on the web. We've seen incredible things over the past few years. Actually, if over the past 20 years we went from the physical world to the digital world, that's what Google and everybody else did. Over the past 3, 4, 5 years, what we've seen is actually the opposite. How we can go from the self-organizing power of the digital world back to the physical one. That's what we saw in the Obama campaign. That's what we saw in the Occupy movement. That's what we saw in the Arab Spring. It was in many other cases. And that's what we are seeing more and more in architecture. And this is an article we did in Domus, an editorial for an issue on open source architecture, how actually architecture can become much more collaborative and bottom up. Actually, Joseph Grima, the editor of Domus, came to me and asked me if I could write it. I said, sure, I could write the editorial, but if it is about open source architecture, let's actually do it together. And so we started writing it on Wikipedia with Paolo Antonelli and Hans-Ulrich Obrist and Nicolas Negroponte and many others. Actually, the article is still evolving on Wikipedia. If you go on it, you can actually keep on tracking it and see how it has changed since the initial version on Domus. And actually, that is also the topic of a book that will come up within Audi next year on open source architecture. Joseph and I are working on. But now, Domus, when you write an editorial, they usually want to put a picture of the person who wrote it. And then we go to the issue, which picture should we use? And then we say, well, okay, so now there's Photoshop, so we actually combine all the pictures together of all of the people who worked on the piece. And actually, my finishing comment is that, I hope that then the picture of the architect of tomorrow will be a bit less like the image of Le Corbusier, presenting his design for Paris from the top down, his hand really raising the whole city and replacing it with new towers, but it will be a little bit more like a picture like this, a picture that combines all of us. Thank you. Thank you. I don't know if we are we streaming the questions as well? Should we switch to Italian? I'm happy to take questions. I can continue in English or we can switch to Italian. I don't know what you would prefer. Yeah. But actually, I think we can have a little bit of interaction and comments and so on. I also have a project that we did on Torino that didn't show that. Maybe it's a minute, a video of a minute that I could show. If should I continue in English or in Italian? But are we still streaming? Okay, so I think we'll continue in English. But feel free to ask the question in Italian as well, and I'll answer in English. Any comments or? Yeah.
Can you describe interaction, potential interaction between the prospect that you made and the idea of democracy? In other words, what kind of risk you see on controlling such kind of intelligence, because it's hierarchical, it's not horizontal.
Yeah.
So, thanks.
It's a very good point. I repeat the question just for the mic. So you know, how does this relate to democracy? If you know, do you see any issues because this information could actually be not shared in a democratic way? And it's a great question. Now, as I was saying before, the amount of information we have today is staggering. You know, I repeated, all the information from the beginning of humanity to 2003 that we produce today every couple of days. Now, there's two points here. The first point is who has access to that information. And I think that's something we should all talk about and engage with and, you know, have a conversation about. We actually organized a forum about this at MIT called Engaging Data, really on this topic, on how this data should be treated, how it should be used, who should have access to it, and so on. Our idea is that it should be done in the most open, transparent, democratic way, but it's something, you know, it's a new field, and we all need to take a stance, talk about it, and have a conversation. It's a very important point. The second issue is something even more radical than this. And it is the fact that, you know, forgetting things has been a very important human activity. It's the basic of human survival. And what we are building now, it's not about architecture, it's not about cities, it's something much more profound. But what we're building is, to a certain extent, a society where it's going to be much more difficult to forget, because everything you do actually goes into a database and is stored there and so on. Even the most innocent things. I usually make the example that, you know, take pictures. Nobody in the old days, in the days when people used to take pictures and print pictures in an analog way, nobody ever thought that taking a picture would be a violation of privacy. You take a picture. Well, first of all, not many people were walking with a camera. And then if you take a few pictures, it would be expensive to print them. You put them in a drawer. You could not search them digitally. You had to open the drawer. And then, you know, after maybe 20, 30 years, they would decay or be thrown away. But now, you got, you know, each of us is like a walking camera. There's probably, I think, 300 cameras in this room, because every phone and and many other things have cameras. And we take a lot of pictures, a lot of video, a lot of that goes online and then stays online. You can search it. You know the debate just a few days ago about Facebook allowing facial recognition. So just if there's a picture, more or less you know who it might be. And then with all of this, then, you know, even taking picture has always been so innocent can become an invasion of privacy. And, you know, I think that's another problem that we should all talk about, because it will shape how our society will be tomorrow. And again, you know, that's another thing why we organize this forum about engaging data. But I think, you know, it would be great in Social Media Week where to continue this discussion, because it's really something that's, it's not about cities and it's not about, you know, Torino. It's about really all of us and how we want our society to be tomorrow.
I have a question. Which is your rapport with the eye tracking technologies? I mean, did you use the eye tracking or other neuroscience technologies in your work?
You mean eye tracking for identifying people, or? Okay. Yeah.
Not only to identify people, also to project this kind of crazy things.
Yeah. No. We. You know. In the end, I wanted to add something. You know, it's not that we are too passionate about technology. What we are passionate about is about people. And we think that new technology can help us as people do different things, or do things in a new way, you know, have a new biking experience, have a new experience when we're in the digital water pavilion. So our projects usually start from people. So sometimes there's technology we know about, but we use them if we need them for something. But it's not that we are focused too much on technologies, but really on the result. And the result, the amazing thing, there's almost like a paradox that as technology is then embedded everywhere, for instance, as you can work with a Wi-Fi anywhere in space, then you can almost forget about a cable and you can be more free. So there's kind of a liberating effect of technology that when it's everywhere, it really allows us then to go back to the things that as humans we really care about. And those things, are always the same things about being together, about good environmental conditions, and a few other things. So to go back to the answer, we know about the technology. We never had an opportunity to use it because we usually start from the human component of the issue, and then we'll try to find a technology to look at to enhance that component, but we don't start usually from the technology. Thanks. Yeah.
Io voglio sapere, collegandomi all'introduzione che abbiamo fatto, che cosa consiglieresti ad una città che vuole trasformarsi in una città sensible, smart, da dove si deve cominciare? Ecco, secondo te qual è il punto di partenza?
Thanks. But I think, and I'll repeat in English just if it is still going streaming. So where should Torino start to become a smart or sensible city? And no, thanks. Oh well, I'll show you later one we did, but it's a funny story. On this, I think sometimes for doing this, it's really more a matter of enabling forces to come up. I think something exciting is the Fab Lab that's here. The Fab Lab is part of a big global movement, but I think the city, I tell you what it shouldn't do, I think, Torino or any other city, she shouldn't just follow and take a bit of this, a bit of that, of this smart, ready-made solutions that you find from the big companies. I think you should really find one sector and try to push the agenda on that sector. And something that for me seems exciting in Torino is that many people believe, and I believe, that we are at the beginning of a new way of production. That's what The Economist just a few weeks ago called the third industrial revolution. Third industrial revolution might be a bit emphatic, but it's really the idea that thanks to digital production and all of these digital machines, production is going to be much more in smaller units, cleaner, smaller production that can happen even inside cities. And I think that's like a beautiful prospect for many cities, and especially for cities that have such a big industrial past, of how actually that type of production, the making, can go back into cities and really can revitalize a lot of it. I think over the past 20 years, we've demolished a lot of old factories. Perhaps we should have kept some more of them. But today we can actually bring back this new type of third industrial revolution factories back into cities. And I think there's a lot of hope there. And if you look at that, the city doesn't need to do much, mostly needs to be like a catalyst for allowing people to take action, so for letting people do startups. And we saw that focusing on startups can have an incredible impact in a very small amount of time. If you just look at what happened to Israel over the past few years, and if you're interested, read also the book Startup Nation, how the country has been transformed by this culture of new entrepreneurial initiatives, startup type, mostly related to digital and making, or what is happening in New York, that actually is now competing fiercely with Boston and San Francisco, and has been in 3 years radically changed the landscape of startups in the United States. I think there is something where there's a lot of interest and hope, and especially in a city with such a great industrial past as Torino. Now, the other thing is another thing. I'll share with you just a small project that we prepared for Torino that we thought it was quite cool. Now, it wasn't selected, but basically we got like around a year ago an email from the owners of the tower next to Piazza Castello, the tower by Reale Mutua, and they wanted to do three things. They wanted actually to put a cafe on the top 2 floors, they wanted to put a new restaurant facing Piazza Castello, and they wanted to put a new elevator outside the tower. And their idea was to put it outside the tower, attached to the tower. So they invited, I think, 4 or 5 architects from from not only from Torino, from Milan, and from other cities to make proposals. And I'll share with you our proposal that we thought it was cool. It was not selected, but we thought it was cool, and I'll share it with you. It's the first time I show it in public in Torino. No, we were not selected. Why? I don't know. You should ask them. But we were not selected.
It's too important to know why. Also for the citizen of Torino. It's beautiful. So definitely, I've got a question, which is honestly the distance between our country to United States, because I founded a new company in New York, just because everything here is flat. So, which is the hope of my town and my country to develop this kind of
look.
projects?
It's a good question. Now, today between the lab and the office, with the lab we have 2 offices in Boston and in Singapore, and with the design office we are in Torino, but also in London and in Boston. So we got we see how different places work in different ways. Now, I think, in Torino, there's great people. And I think, and for instance, the office is working very well. Is doing great projects all across the world from Torino. So I think there's a lot of potential in the city. What it lacks sometimes, not really Torino. I think Torino is better than the rest of Italy. But what Italy lacks often is the idea that things can change. And, I think that's one of the great things about the United States, that people are more easily jump on something and, on a dream and try to make it happen. If you got a crazy idea, if you present it in the United States, people will tell you great. And then, then after a while, they might say, well, maybe something doesn't work or so on. So they start from the positive thing. In Europe, in general, the result is the opposite. People first say, no, what is this? And then, after, but if you try, and then they say, well, maybe, and so on. But you start from it's almost like that because things haven't changed for so long, people have lost hope. And I think that changes a lot, because if you are in a place where people still have hope, the things happen much faster, and it's much easier to work, and people don't use veto. Another problem is that when people lose hope, then they start to use veto in power, so to block things, to use their kind of ability to stop something instead of promoting something. So it becomes negative instead of positive. So I think that is a problem, I think, of some of Europe and some of Italy. Having said it, as I said, I think today, from the design point of view, the office in Torino is doing better than the other offices we have. Singapore is a great place for working as well, for working in Asia. Asia is booming like crazy. South America is booming like crazy. So yeah, I would say there's a lot. I think there's a lot of talent. There's an issue of more of not in the city, but in the country, about how do we let it emerge, and how can we turn it into a more positive force? How can we turn a negative force into a positive one? So I think that's a goal. All right. There's a question down there. Get a microphone so that people can hear us online.
Well, first, thank you for all this. It's very inspiring and beautiful. I got actually two questions. The first is just about the Amsterdam Bike project. I think I sort of missed how you solved the problem about traffic, but I love the solution for all other, data collecting, problems. And here we come to my second question, which is, okay, you're doing great things with this kind of data, and you're collecting very high-dimensional data. My question is, you sort of suggested that at this point, it's enough to just visualize data in a smart way, and it's beautiful. But how far do you think it is the point in which you will get to some more sophisticated tweak of this? Sometimes you cannot just see things just by visualizing them, or you can see things by visualizing them, but you need some, filtering of the data, some inference, and so, yeah.
It's a great point. It's a very good point. Then I'll answer both things. So the first one, briefly, yes. Well, the mayor came to us asking how we could contribute to the traffic situation, not really to solve it. So we decided together that we should focus just on one dimension. So we didn't aim to look at all the dimensions, but just, with the mayor, we decided to focus on biking, and how we can. The idea of the mayor is how we can make biking even more popular in Copenhagen. So that's where the idea of the bicycle came from. Now, on the second point, I've shown a little bit, but there's many other projects that I could have elaborated. But the point is, yes, we got this incredible amount of data. How do we deal with it? And the first thing is to visualize it. When you visualize it, you can also start some interesting feedback loop. So you give it to people, and people can respond to that. That's a way to change the system. And you change the system because people get information and respond to it. Sometimes you need not just to visualize, but to do analysis. Like in the example of the UK, of the regions, and in the UK and in Italy, there's quite a lot of interesting mathematics behind that we developed in order to define the regions and understand, how from the data you can detect communities over space. And we actually have more and more projects in this space. We have a group in our lab that's mostly made of people from mathematics and physics and engineering. And they're working on this project called the Urban Code. Code like coding and understanding, has this double meaning of the code, like the DNA, the urban DNA, but also how coding and analyzing the data can help us to better understand cities. And actually, I'll show you something else that's, again, it's still under review at the moment as a paper that where we are working on. Sorry, I need to open it from here. It's something where we are actually, I'll give you just a couple of examples of how data can allow you to do some of this. How you can apply sophisticated analysis to data and learn about things. Well, let me share with you two things, probably. We are working a little bit about on self-driving cars with other people. Self-driving cars are already a reality. You're probably all familiar with the Google car that drives itself. There's one at MIT, there's one at Stanford. We're also looking at what happens inside the vehicle. I'll share with you here a quick video about that. Just a moment. Just one sec. So collecting a lot of data on the vehicle, and I'll get to your answer in a second. But and the reason we want to share this with you is, how the data and the analysis of the data can then help you inform design, and you can get to this. We think some very interesting design through data analysis that becomes exciting. So this was to answer your question, but it's not only about visualizing. Visualizing can be great to actually promote some feedback loop, so you see the data and people respond to that. But actually, there's many layers by which data can be analyzed, processed, and then inform the design component. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think if there is no more questions, I think we probably should wrap up here. But thanks everybody. It was a pleasure to be here.